Welcome to Incredibly Ordinary, the podcast about ordinary people with incredible stories, hosted by Lance Billings, Josh Kilsch, and Nate Reynolds from Billings Group Financial Advisors. Is this your coffee you got? Or
No, that's Starbucks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about how your coffee has the
No, we don't want to
awesome
go there.
aroma and then the flavor better on?
Daniel, do you drink coffee?
I'm not a coffee drinker.
Okay, well, that'll save you a lot of money. Are you a tea drinker? Do you like tea?
I do drink tea a little bit. So being a runner, I'm obviously water, Gatorade.
Yeah, yeah.
What is your, so I guess I'm getting introduced to the whole world of like electrolytes, like Element and like all the gels and all that kind of stuff. What's your go-to for your fueling during your races or your marathons?
Yeah, so for shorter races, I usually just stick to something simple like Gatorade. For longer races, things like the goo, the gels are really nice. So I always tell people the main thing is just practice what you're going to use in the race during your training runs.
Don't switch it on the race day. And yeah, in the world of gels, it seems like it's just completely blown up where it's like you said, goo, you can, all these different types and everything. It's like just find what I guess your stomach agrees with, because you said you don't want to be halfway through and, oh gosh, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of races will go ahead and post way in advance what specific products they're going to have.
Oh,
so I tell people, if you haven't used them, just try them, and if they're working for you, then use their products. If not, just bring your own with you and use those.
Yeah, which is smart. Like I said, don't want to switch in the middle of it. But, well, cool, man. We've got Daniel Craig, his last name, right? Yep, we got Daniel here with us. And so Daniel is the co-director of the Crossroads Marathon race here in Salina. Super excited to have you on here to talk about Crossroads Marathon, and it seems like it's really blown up the past couple of years in a good way. So thanks, man, for being here. And so I guess mainly before we get into the race, why don't you just kind of give a brief background about yourself? Are you from here in Salina, or?
So I grew up out by Gypsum,
Okay.
Kansas. So and I went out to southeast Slane for high school, and then went down to Pittsburgh State for college, and then Missouri State for grad school. Started running when I was in the 6th grade. I had a 6th grade teacher by the name of Skip Olson, and a lot of the longtime runners, his name will be very familiar. He actually helped start the Festival Fitness 5, now is the Smoky River Run here in Salina. Did a lot of, race directing, was a coach out at Southeast, was a coach out at Marymount College. Kind of, a lot of people probably thought of him as kind of the running guru of Central Kansas, and he just saw me run at a play day event and said, "Hey, you look like a long distance runner. You got to go out for track." So went out for track in junior high, and then ran junior high and high school. Ran down at Pittsburgh State, did the cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track, and then had 1 year of eligibility left when I was at Missouri State and ran outdoor track there.
Have you always been long distance then, like in track too?
I have been,
Okay.
yeah. 5,000, 10,000, so like 3.1 miles, 6.2 miles were the events I did in college.
Awesome, man. Because Pitt has the indoor track, right?
They've got a very nice indoor track.
Pitt, I think Wichita has one, and then does Washburn have one, or are they outdoor?
I'd have to check on that for sure.
I was talking to somebody recently telling me they were going to Kansas City for one of their indoor tracks there, and they said it was super nice. And they mentioned Pitt. I was like, I didn't know Pitt had an indoor track there.
Yeah, a couple years ago, they built one of the nicest indoor tracks in college, and so they actually host D2 nationals, indoor nationals, quite a bit now.
How big is Pitt? I mean, is that, because it's kind of middle of nowhere by Parsons, Kansas. Is that a pretty decent-sized university then?
Yeah, it's a Division II, I think 6,000 to 7,000 students. And actually, their track team has just exploded. They won, for the men, they won indoor and outdoor national championships last year.
Dang. Okay. So Pitt and then Missouri Western, you said?
Missouri State.
Missouri State. Okay, for your graduate. So you're here in Salina now. What do you do here in Salina?
So I work at Tammy Walker Cancer Center. I do their community outreach. So I have a pretty extensive grant writing background. I put on a lot of the free cancer screening events that we do every year. I'm a tobacco treatment specialist, so if people are trying to quit smoking, chewing, I can help them do that as well. And we actually have our own run, the Faith for Cure 5K.
Oh, is that here in Salina?
It's here in Salina.
When is that one?
It's in September, usually the 3rd Saturday in September.
Okay. So do you know all the races in Salina, all the 5Ks and most of the races? There's like the Chloe one here in April, right?
Love Chloe in April, and then you've got the Smoky River Run in June.
Okay.
And then you've got Rolling Hills Zoo has one in August. The Fafer Cure is usually about the third Saturday in September. CKF Addiction Treatment has one. Usually I think it's the second weekend in September.
Okay.
And then, of course, the Salina Crossroads Marathon in November, and then the Frosty Fun Runs are 2 weeks after us.
Okay. And so after college, then did you always continue to run even after school and everything?
Yeah, I kind of moved up distances, so I focused a lot on the half marathon and then got into the marathon.
And we were talking earlier about the Boston and how you were able to run one of the Boston marathons. I'm assuming you qualified for it then. When did you qualify for that, and when did you do the Boston race?
I had to look back at the exact year. That'd be around 2008, 2009. So it's just an incredible experience. There's just no other race in the world like it. I always say there's the reason that virtually every race in the world has on their website that they're a Boston qualifier. It's just unbelievable. And we were talking earlier, imagine bussing 30,000 people out to a starting line. There's over 500,000 people along the course. And the year I ran it, it was kind of rainy and cold and dreary. That did not stop people from being on the course, and volunteers were just incredibly passionate and excited. And just the thought of having like some of the very best runners in the entire world right there in that same race is pretty cool.
Because you were saying your starting time, you were 7 seconds behind one of the Olympic athletes right there. Like you were literally on top of each other. And it's kind of the only sports profession where you can be that close to the actual elite athletes, I guess you would call them.
Yeah, they have kind of a separate starting spot for the professional runners, and I was fortunate enough to be right at the very front row of the non-professional runners. And so they're just right there, and they're coming back high-fiving people, and just amazing experience.
That's awesome. And so when you mentioned, okay, so the elite professional runners, what kind of marathon times are you talking about to be considered kind of in that elite time frame?
Yeah, so I mean,
And I'm assuming it's age based, but
yeah, so for the elite guys, I mean, some of those guys are anywhere from, well, the world record is just over 2 hours to, 2 hours and 18, 19 minutes is, really elite.
and that's a good half marathon time. I mean, good night. Okay.
They actually have, and we'd love to have it sometime. So some of your bigger races like the Chicago Marathon will have a little treadmill, and they'll set it on the pace that the world record holder runs for the entire 26.2 miles. And most runners, basically runners just run as long as they can, and then it shoots them off the back of it. And people are a little stunned at, like, a lot of people can only run that for half a mile or a mile, and that world record holder's doing that the whole time. And they look like they're not even running hard.
Is that like a 5-something minute pace then, doing that?
They're down in the 440s or a little faster.
I want to back up real quick because I just was interested in, your profession. Is that what you went to school for grant writing, or for what was your undergrad and your graduate in?
Yeah, so I was a biology background for my undergrad, just because I knew I wanted to get into either a public health or a health-related field, and really having that science background I think is just ideal. And then I did health promotion and wellness management. And I was actually looking at, more like working at a fitness center, being a personal trainer, things like that. And when I was in grad school, my advisor just said, "You're an incredible public speaker. You've got great grant writing skills." And when I was doing my internship at the American Cancer Society, I did a colorectal cancer awareness event. Just fell in love with event planning. And so from there, I decided I definitely wanted to go in the nonprofit sector and do kind of community health promotion work. So came back here, started out at CKF Addiction Treatment, worked there for 12 and a half years, through a lot of grants, chronic disease risk reduction grant from Kansas Department of Health and Environment, had some grants from Kansas Health Foundation. So worked on some of the initiatives in the community, like strengthening our no smoking ban that we had in the workplaces and restaurants, and did a lot of youth prevention work when I was there.
Wow. I love it's like your whole life is just geared towards growth and getting people healthier and getting them outside and just pushing themselves to grow. I think that's cool.
Yeah, running's just had a huge impact for me. I mean, it's something I've always enjoyed, and it's really helped expand my world. I mean, go to races like Boston, you see people from all over the world, and it's just been really cool. You can connect with people like that.
So you mentioned the coach, when you were seventh, whatever grade it was. Family, I mean, does your family have a history of running? Kind of where did that come from, except for your coach seeing it in you? Yeah,
so Dad ran a lot when he was in high school. Okay. They didn't really have track and field wasn't near as organized then. So I've always wondered.
Just like cross country back then. Was cross country even big then, or?
It really wasn't.
Okay.
He did track and then he did basketball, and I mean, really the coaches just had him go out and just run a couple miles. You look at the training kids do now, and he was under 5 minutes in the mile just off of very limited. I mean, they weren't doing all the stuff like core strength and doing strides and drills and all the technique stuff that the runners are doing now. So I've always wondered what he would have ran if he'd had the coaching. And it's just unbelievable the last 5-6 years how much faster runners have gotten.
Is that, do you think part of that is development and shoes now they're wearing and just kind of technology increases in that?
The shoes have definitely made a huge difference. You've probably heard the term super shoes. They have the plated technology. Those have been shown.
Even the carbon fiber in them now? Okay.
Yeah. Those have been shown even for your Olympic athletes to potentially improve performance by as much as 4%, which is pretty huge. It's kind of hard to believe that, your shoes could make that big of an impact. And then we just know a lot more about nutrition. We know a lot more about just, core strength. A lot of the things maybe we didn't pay as much attention to as we could have.
Yeah, because a 4%, you talk about shaving off some seconds to get that next record. That's a pretty big impact right there. And so Boston Marathon, how many marathons have you done?
Probably ran about 15 or 16 total.
Okay. Are you one of those guys that wants to try and get like every single state kind of marathon, or you have like a goal with how many you want to get to or certain areas?
Yeah, I've been a little bit more focused on just seeing what kind of times I can get. The cool thing about track and field is now there's a lot more emphasis on like masters running. So I just turned 40 a couple of years ago, and they actually track, and they track state records like for 40 to 45, 45 to 49, and on. So that's kind of a cool incentive to keep training and see how can I do against other runners in Kansas that are in that age group.
Because master starts at 40, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And when I was looking at the Boston qualifier for age and times, and it looks like, I forget what age it was, but it looks like that time really goes down. I think it was like 3:15 range where it really went to a more sustainable time around like age 35-ish. Is that do you see a lot of people later on in life become more Boston qualifiers?
Yeah, and it's interesting, even when you look at like world records, now the last world record was actually a 24-year-old, which is just amazing that somebody because it takes so long to build up the mileage to be able to perform that well at a marathon. But traditionally, a lot of your runners in your early 30s to mid 30s has kind of been where runners have peaked in the marathon.
Have you ever done, or do you have any interest in going beyond the marathon, kind of getting in those, I guess, the ultra, like the 30 milers or beyond, or 50Ks or beyond?
Definitely would at some point. I still want to. Right now, I'm still at the point where I can be pretty competitive at most race distances. The hard thing when you move up in distances is you just lose speed because you're running so many miles and you're not doing a lot of the speed work. But I've always been a runner that the further the distance, the better I do.
Good. Okay. And are you, it seems like there's a big talk about, is it road or trail racing? Do you like more road racing then?
I mostly do road racing. Now, trail racing's kind of fun just because you can do it like early on in your training cycle to get in a hard workout because there's not the pressure of running for a time. Okay. Whereas when you're on the roads, you kind of have an expectation of what you want to run.
I'm right there. We'll kind of go into the Crossroads now, but so Crossroads Marathon started in 2021, right? Is that when the first one was?
2022.
Okay, 2022. Okay. What was the interest in starting a marathon, I guess, here in Salina?
Yeah, so Chris Lahecka, who's another co-race director with me, we just kind of started talking about what would it look like to have a marathon in Salina. We've got a lot of great, 5Ks, and we've got the 5 mile for the Smoky River Run. When you look at Kansas, there's not a lot of marathons. You've got a few in smaller towns like Abilene. You've got Prairie Fire in Wichita. You've got Garmin in Olathe. And one of the things that's really exploding right now is the 50-state clubs. So where people want to run a marathon in all 50 states, or they want to run a half marathon in all 50 states. And when you think about Salina, we're ideal because we're flat, which is very conducive to a fast race. And so we were looking at kind of what would be the best time frame. And November is when we chose, and temperatures have typically been in the 30s. So to me, one of the big things, if you're going to have a marathon, you've got to have a good course. And so the first thing we did was reached out to the police department, and we said, what would be possible? Because obviously there's one of the challenges when you put on races is you want to minimize the impact on traffic and on the community as a whole. And so we kind of talked through, what what would it take to have a good running course? And is that feasible with not shutting down traffic too much in the community? So we came up with a course that we thought would be a pretty solid first-year course. So we went through the permit process. We reached out to a lot of runners in the community. We reached out to some organizations. Vortex Companies was actually our title sponsor that first year. They were huge. They helped us develop our logo, our graphics, our website. Really gave us a professional look.
Awesome.
And one comment we got was people weren't used to seeing first-year races that well organized and having that high quality in terms of their website and their logos and graphics. We started, it was about 15 months before the race actually happened that we started planning, just because we wanted to make sure we had complete buy-in from the city of Salina. We wanted to reach out to other races and say, hey, if you were starting your race again, what would you do different? And then really think through how are we going to market this race, because there's several hundred races in the United States, just marathons. And so you've got to do some things that are either fun or unique or something to kind of catch people's attention and make them want to come to Salina, Kansas.
So what was that thing you guys did to have it come to Salina? What was kind of your marketing pitch for that?
Yeah, so that first year we tried to really focus on, so we're a small town, and a lot of runners, I mean, it's fun to go do a huge race like Boston, Chicago, but it's also pretty stressful just navigating that whole process of getting to where you need to go, and, the travel piece. And so we had some fun elements. We reached out to Cash Hollister and had music along the course, which for a small town race like ours, a lot of races don't do. It's pretty much just a race sometimes. And then Vortex actually custom designed their medals, so they were very big, very high quality medals. And the groups that really appeals to, if somebody's running their first marathon, they really want a really nice medal to remember that first marathon. Same thing with the 50 state runners. And then we're super flat, super fast. I mean, really marketed that, especially to some of the states like Colorado, because they have, more higher elevation, more hills. So we thought we'd be a perfect Boston qualifier because of that. And I created a listserv of over 600 running clubs in all 50 states. And we just sent them emails and we said, hey, we'll even give you one free entry if you all just send our information out to all of your runners, because we just wanted to get our name out there. And a lot of people have just never seen anything like that. And we're just kind of intrigued, got on our Facebook page. And one thing we pride ourselves in is we try to respond to virtually any question or any post on our Facebook page. And when you're that responsive, it really makes a big difference.
So your first year of doing it, 2022, how many racers did you guys have?
We had just over 800 total participants, and that was between we had a marathon, a half marathon, we had a 5K run, 5K walk, and then we had a full marathon relay and a half marathon relay.
And when you look at the breakdown of who's doing what race, is the majority doing the half and the full marathon, or?
The half marathon is always the biggest.
Okay.
And if you look at Prairie Fire in Wichita, if you look at Garmin, the half has just become such a popular distance, especially in the Midwest, it seems like.
Is that because it's a long enough distance where it's like a really cool thing to do, but you still feel good afterwards, probably?
Yeah, and like for a marathon, you've really got to get in some good training, some long runs. A half marathon, it's long enough to be pretty challenging, but you don't have to put in as much training.
Okay. And so you mentioned Boston qualifier, and so I'm assuming to become a Boston qualified marathon, what all goes into that? Is there a lot of certifications you have to get for that?
Yeah, so you have to be USA Track and Field certified. And so we reached out to a certifier who's over in the Olathe area and had him come. What he does is he comes and he's got a bike with special kind of calibrating device on it, and he actually rides over the course. And it's pretty fascinating. So when he comes to a stop sign and you're going to turn, he's got to stop the bike, and then he picks it up and carries it. And then the bike actually calculates what is the perfect tangent. Because even on a bicycle, he's not going to be able to measure the perfect tangent. So after a race, if you hear runners complaining that, well, I actually ran 26.3, it's because you can't run a perfect tangent. And the course is measured on what is the shortest distance from point A to point B.
Interesting.
And that's where one of the things we've tried to do every year is try to reduce the number of turns. Because every turn that you have in a race, runners aren't going to be able to run a perfect tangent. So every turn, you're going to force them to run just a little bit further than what the actual race distance is. So he comes, he does that first measurement, Then he's got to come back, do a second measurement, got to verify all that. Then he's got to send the information to a regional certifier who goes in and actually double checks all of his work, and it's down to the detail. So if you've got a turn, he'll tell you you've got to put the cone 8 feet from the light pole, 8 feet north and 3 feet east. And it has to be that
Precise.
level of detail. Yeah.
Because if someone does set a record, and let's say they set a record for a marathon on your race, you're mentioning that they have to certify it and like back check it, and they'll come out here and go over every single little aspect of making sure that is a correct distance.
Yeah, and there have been records that have not been what they call ratified. When a record is ratified, that means it's official. It actually counts as a record. They've went back and they've double-checked the course to make sure it is the exact distance. And there's been a race in Kansas, and there's been some international races, pretty well-renowned races that have just someone maybe put the cones in slightly wrong location and a record didn't count. So we actually have one of our other co-race directors, Andrew Manley, goes around the entire course and double-checks all of that for us.
So there's 3 race directors together then on this. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you all 3 just kind of come together with this idea? How did you guys approach each other to have this idea for the race? Was it one person's idea to begin with, and then the rest got involved, or?
So Chris and I really started the conversations and got the process going. And so one of the things we really wanted to do is we wanted to give the entry fees back to local organizations in the community.
Oh.
So we give 100% of the race entry fees back to 5 local youth sports organizations. And so we really wanted that financial accountability. And Andrew Manley is a vice president at First Bank, Kansas. Okay. And so we brought him on board just that way. Chris and I were removed from the funding piece of it, and we had somebody that we knew was well respected in the community handling those dollars.
That's awesome. Okay, so then do you guys go around then and just kind of present the proceeds back to all the organizations?
We do, and we post check presentations for all the organizations. So just kind of another way
That's
to add
awesome.
some accountability and let people know here's the dollars that we received and here's the dollars being given out to the community.
What organizations, like what are some examples of the organizations that you guys do that for?
So the Salina Burn Track and Field Club was
Okay.
one, Salina Family YMCA, Kansas Youth Sports, the School Marathon Foundation for USD 305, and then Salina Area Youth Sportsmanship Initiative.
Man, that's awesome. And so the race then, okay, so that's one huge impact that the race has in the local community. How about like the economic impact on the positive side for Salina? I'm assuming because 800 the first year, and then last year, what did you guys jump up to in entries for the race?
We were 3,402 runners that registered.
That's hotels. I mean, that's eating out. Have you guys looked at it, or do you guys kind of know what kind of impact that has on Salina?
We do. We work with Visit Salina.
Okay.
And so we start getting some preliminary estimates. We have questions when they register, asking them how many nights do they intend to stay, how many people are going to be coming with them. And then after the race, we actually do a post-race survey, and we ask them to provide kind of that follow-up information for us. And then I know Visit Salina actually has a whole complex formula that I haven't gotten into where they look at, what were the hotel numbers for that weekend versus other weekends. And so they generate an economic impact analysis for us. And so the first year we were at 446,000 was the estimated visitor economic impact. And this year we were 1.02 million.
Dang.
For the visitor estimated economic impact.
That is awesome. That is okay.
It's really incredible.
And last year too, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't somebody from every single state participate?
Yeah, we were super excited to have all 50
That's
states,
cool.
and we had somebody from Canada and Mexico that had registered. And I'm always interested. I never actually reach out, but I'm always curious to find out, so how did people, from a particular state hear about it?
Yeah.
And I did have a few where they emailed me for information and kind of told me things. And one of them, so the one from Alaska, for instance, had a family member in Kansas, and they just happened to be coming to Kansas that weekend. And their family member they both were runners, and their family member was like, hey, there's this marathon in Salina. Do you want to go run it? So it's pretty cool how people find out about it.
That is really cool. I'm going to turn the fan. I'm getting cold. One second.
Okay.
So.
I think it's incredible how, just your passion for really started with, it goes back to the beginning of the story of that coach, seeing something in you, just saying, hey, and just that one spark has this ripple effect across your life. You know, it's that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, there wouldn't be enough time to share all of the different stories from people, whether it's a cancer survivor that's completing a race, whether it's somebody who's, had health, conditions their whole life and never dreamt they could ever do a race, and suddenly they're finishing a 5K or even a half marathon. Especially the people that are running the first time they've ever done a race. It's just like, you just see the joy and just the exuberance when they finish is pretty incredible.
It's never too late to run, no matter how old or young or size or shape.
We had to, and it was our error, we had to add an 80-plus division because there's more and more runners over the age of 80 that are competing, which is incredibly awesome.
That is so cool. How about like volunteers? How does that work, getting these volunteers? 'Cause that's a lot of, to do a race, to have 3,000 plus people run, that's a lot of volunteers to help out with that. How does that go about? How do you guys get volunteers for that?
Yeah, so we had over 240 volunteers last year, and we're actually hoping to get over 300. So our local media has been amazing.
Awesome.
Putting out press releases for us, that's been huge. We reach out to a lot of our larger employers, a lot of our banks, a lot of our school districts, our colleges have been really, really helpful. And then the cool thing is, once people volunteer, they're usually just completely blown away. I had some people that I knew that really had no background in running, hadn't really been to any races, and they just knew I was involved. So they're like, sure, I'll volunteer once. And they're helping out with registration. And I went up and asked them, how's it going? And they're like, there was someone from Florida and North Dakota and South Dakota. They're like, I didn't know runners traveled like this. It's just a really cool experience. Seeing in Boston, we talked about, is even more so. I mean, there's hundreds of countries where people come from to go there, but we were pretty excited just to have a couple of countries in all 50 states. Is pretty cool.
And so far for the race for this year, how many do you have entries right now?
We have 2,100.
Okay, and we're only in February, so you got a long ways to go. And what's your goal for this year?
We'd love to go over 4,000.
Okay.
So we've been working with the city of Salina, and they've been an amazing partner. Every year, we've just been trying to make some little changes to the course, both in terms of how can we minimize the impact on traffic and then create a really great runner experience. And I think this year's course, we hope we have to the point where we can just keep this as a course going forward. From a runner standpoint, it's perfect. There's less turns, there's more pavement, and I think it'll have less disruption to the traffic as well. And that's kind of why we went with a 2-loop marathon course.
Okay. One
is it just shuts down less of the community. 2, you have to use less volunteers. And then 3, the marathon runners and half marathon runners get to run together pretty much the entire race. So it creates more people around everyone. For volunteers, we give them either a T-shirt or like a vest that they can wear when they're on the course. And then we actually do a short little volunteer training. So we want to make sure that people, understand kind of what their roles, what their responsibilities are. We have contact information, so if something comes up, they're not sure how to handle it, they know who they can call. And we have kind of a call tree list, so they can just call the appropriate person and make sure that we take care of them.
Do you have to have a lot of on-hand, like medical or CPR certified staff or volunteers at certain parts of the race then for that?
Yeah, so Dr. Westbrook, who's over at Maury Clinic, was our race medical director, and then Salina Family Healthcare, and then KU, their school of nursing program. They've been great partners, so we had them strategically placed along the course, and we have a walkie-talkie system so that they can communicate back and forth.
Awesome.
Also work very closely with Sink County Emergency Management, and they're in very close contact with the National Weather Service, because that's one of the biggest concerns you have is what's the weather going to be. I think we were talking earlier, there's been some races that have gotten surprised by unexpected heat waves coming through, and I know the first year, everything's looking great, and then Saturday, we're doing packet pickup registration, and I get this text, you got to jump on a call. And I was like, uh-oh, I wonder what this is about. And the weather forecaster said, there's actually a slight chance of snow. He's like, I think you're going to be okay going south via, but just want to let you know, a heads up. And we got fortunate that year. It didn't hit us, but just knowing that information helps you prepare, because, if something like snow did happen, you could delay the race and make sure the course was safe and still have the race. But that way you could let runners know ahead of time that, hey, we may have to delay the start, prepare, make sure the roads are safe to run on.
'Cause I think it'd be a worst case scenario as a whole race to have to cancel the race. And I don't know is that even an option? If that many people are there, would you guys look at canceling it versus just keep on postponing it?
So I always say, see what other races have done and learn from what they do well, and also learn from their mistakes. And so there was a very large race this year that had to cancel literally a couple hours before the race. We definitely want to avoid doing that. If there's any chance, we're going to be, in constant contact with the National Weather Service and alert runners. What we did that first year, just because there was kind of some iffy weather from some of the surrounding states that were going to be driving in. And so I just emailed out to the entire listserv and just said, hey, if there's inclement weather, we will transfer your race at no cost to next year. It's not worth traveling if you're going to be concerned about, how is it going to be safe to travel?
Yeah. One thing I did see too, I think it was on your guys' Facebook page, was there was maybe taking Indian Rock Hill out of the race, but there were some runners, or a lot of runners, like, no, we like the hill. And you were saying that the hill is kind of a staple of the race, and that you've had a lot of people compliment that how tough it is, that they love that hill. And that's kind of an icon of the Crossroads.
Yeah, every course has some iconic point. I mean, you can't even talk about Boston Marathon without mentioning Heartbreak Hill. And anybody who's ran it, you mention Heartbreak Hill, and they probably just grimace.
Glitching or something.
They immediately remember how they felt. But once you get done, it's pretty cool. Once you get to the top of it, you're like, wow, this is the hill everybody's been I hear everybody talking about. So we label it Salina's locally famous hill. And it's really not about how steep the hill is, it's where it's at. So when you're doing that second loop and it's around mile 20 or 21, it doesn't matter how long or how steep a hill is, any hill is going to hurt a lot more. So it's become, a lot of runners just have a lot of fun, like getting their friends to sign up. And then they're like, oh, by the way, there's this huge hill.
And it's going to hurt. So you mentioned more pavement. Is that kind of detouring the course then away from the dike then, trying to get more on the road then?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a really scenic part of the course, and it's, really conducive to not needing as many volunteers, things like that. But when you're looking at runners trying to get Boston qualifiers, pavement's going to be the fastest. And so we're really excited for this next year's course. We still have to have the certifier come out and certify it and things like that before we actually make an official announcement on it. But I think runners are really going to like it.
Good. Cool. Man, it'll be my first road marathon, so I'm pumped for it. So it'll be a fun one to go to. I'm going to kind of back up a little bit more too. When you were running all your marathons and you're still running them, when you were trying to visualize the Salina Crossroads, were you taking bits and pieces from each run of, okay, here's what I personally liked or didn't like, and did that develop a lot of how the race is run here in Salina? It's just experience you've had of pros and cons, and then.
Yeah, and the one thing we really highlight is we don't want to just be a race. We want to be an experience, and the experience doesn't start on race day. It starts months in advance when you send out emails to runners to tell them kind of how the flow of the day is going to happen. What are the age group awards? We want to just try to answer every question we can before they even have the chance to ask it. Because I've been to some big races that I get there and it's just like, you don't hardly even know what's going on because they haven't communicated well. And so we try to just communicate every piece of information that we would want to have as a runner. And that's actually one of the areas we got the most compliments on. A couple people just commented, and Chris Lehecka has done some ultra marathons. Andrew Manley does some triathlons, does some running. And one of the most frequent comments was, you can tell that runners are actually putting on this race.
Awesome. That's probably a very satisfying thing for you guys to hear, though, when you're the directors of it, hearing that they get us when they're directing this.
Yeah, especially, can you imagine running a first marathon? You're going to this race, especially last year, we really even communicated more because, you're going from, people were thinking their sign up for races going to be like 800, 1,000. And then once we started getting like 2,500 people running their first ones, we were like, man, I'm actually going to be running a big marathon. I thought I was going to do this smaller race. We communicated a lot and just let people know how easy it was going to be to get to the starting line, that we had. Parking is always number one concern because there's nothing that can just mess up a race more than not knowing where to park and driving around and then getting there late. And so we're really fortunate. We moved it to City Light Stage for year 2, which gives us a great post-race celebration venue, but it also, there's all those free parking areas along there as well.
Because the first year was at the hotel there under the awning, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And we still do our packet pickup on the day before there. It just creates, Homewood Suites does an amazing job. It just creates a very professional look and a very professional feel for us.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh, and the one thing I do want, before I forget about it, so thinking about other races, so what our goal was thinking about, like, what do the big races do? And can we take that and make it like ours? Obviously, you have to kind of, bring it to a smaller level. But the garage actually had a pace car for us that led the first, fourth of a mile for us. And that's something you only see at huge races. So people were just kind of blown away that, like, the level of details that we did.
I think I did see that in that one guy's video he did. And then you guys also have, maybe every race has this, but you have the pacers too for each kind of time frame. Is that hard to find volunteers to be pacers in a race or a run?
So we work with a group called Runner's Edge out of Kansas City, and they've been an amazing partner for us. They're tremendously affordable, and those pacers, we give them a free entry, but they're not actually paid. So we've done some things like giving them a free T-shirt, or even giving them, a free entry where maybe a family member could come run the race as well, kind of as a thank you. Okay. And they have it down to a science. So I decided I was going to watch one of the pacers, and this was a 4-hour pacer. And they came through the half marathon at 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. You can't get much more just exact than that.
Do you know what a pacer is?
I don't.
Do you want to kind of explain?
I was imagining somebody that's keeping the flow, I guess, of the race. And
yeah, so they have pacers for different time groups. So let's say you want to run a 3.5-hour marathon. So they would have a pacer who would they carry a little stick that they actually carry, so that way you know what time frame the pacer is going to be trying to hit. And they have it down to a science. So that pacer, anybody who's wanting to run close to 3.5 hours would be with that pacer. And then there might be a 3 hours and 45 minutes, and then a 4 hour, and a 4:15, and a 4:30, and a 4:45, and a 5. And they don't just pace; they get to know the runners that are running with them. To me, it's incredible. Not only are they hitting these exact paces, but they're having conversations with the runners. They're monitoring them. So they might, deviate from the pace a little bit. If everybody's hurting a little more than what they think they should be at that point, they might ease up just a little bit and then pick it up later. They're incredible. And then we also have what we call bike rabbits. And so for the lead male and the lead female runners in the half and the full, we have runners that are on bicycles that are leading the way, and that way they can also clear the course. If there's a point where you kind of circle back, they can make sure nobody's on the wrong side of the road that might interfere with them.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yeah, that would be...
The amount of detail that goes in to pull this off is
I was thinking just the race of, okay, you start here, you turn there, go.
Well, I'm 100% ignorant towards all things running, except for, Nate's got quite a bit of passion. He's been reading books and of course, just telling me to start running. And I was like, man, I'm not a runner. And then he's like, everybody can be a runner. But listening to your passion and then all of the input, all of the detail that goes into this to make, I think what you said, what stuck out to me was the experience, and the fact that this really enhances Salina economically, but also just bringing the community together. Like I think about all the things that Vortex has brought, and work, visit Salina, and then it trickles into the lives of all these youths, to be able to do the sports, and which then circles back. I overthink everything, so I'm just thinking how cool this is, because it's like circling back, kind of to your passion. If kids are doing sports and being healthy, your profession, your calling to help people, with maybe avoid substance abuse and then also be as healthy as they can. I mean, it's like your passion, your hobby circles all the way back into. It's just big wheels keep on turning, So I'm blown away. I've learned so much. Just like, I'm very ignorant, but this is cool.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, not only are people being physically active, but there's the social connection piece as well.
Absolutely.
There's groups in Salina that train every Saturday together, and they run over parts of the course during their training runs. And we have running clubs from Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Like they register large numbers of runners. They rent an Airbnb. They travel up here together. They just make it a really cool training experience for it, and they just have a blast doing it.
That's awesome.
They kind of forget that they're training hard because they're having so much fun together and they're looking
The
forward to it.
camaraderie and well, Nate's been he's been running, and he keeps sending me the lead up to what you guys were talking on in the language, but
I've never done a marathon. I've got one in April, and so I'm attempting to do one in April, and so I'm trying to get my first distance mileage in, and each time, I just rub it in there, like, hey guys, look what we did this weekend.
I see that, and I'm thinking that just I don't even think that doesn't even. There's not a category in my brain to even try to think that I could do that. But listening to you talk, I'm probably gonna get suckered into this, aren't I?
That's part of the podcast, and he already
Yeah.
told me is that he's already got an entry
Sure.
for you for the half marathon. So, but you'll be with the 80-year-old guy walking.
that's
Don't worry.
right.
Don't worry.
I'll
So,
keep him company.
There you go.
He'll be so annoyed by my conversation that
Get this guy away from me.
That's right.
Do you think you've seen a big increase in ever since COVID, a big uptick in runners, and just because during COVID it seemed like a lot of athletic events stopped, but you could still run outside. Do you think there's been a large interest in running events since COVID?
Yeah, and COVID really hurt running a lot.
Okay.
And it's a lot of races still are not back to their pre-COVID registration numbers. Now I think we're getting
Really?
closer, and last year was a pretty good bounce back year. One challenge I think with running is it's kind of gotten so expensive. And so one of the reasons we have what we feel are really reasonable entry fees is to try to make it as easy as possible for people to register. And we actually will give super discounted rates early on. One, it kind of drives excitement. It gets people talking about the race, which you can't pay for advertising to do that. And then second, it hopefully gives people that may not always have the opportunity to be able to afford doing an event, the opportunity to do that. And then third is kind of for our benefit. There's been so many races that I just saw a stat the other day that they think nationally, it's about 25% of runners sign up the last week before the race. And so you typically have to order T-shirts and medals 4 to 6 weeks in advance. And so there's been some very large marathons that have ran out of finishers' medals and had to mail them out afterwards. And so it's kind of an incentive for us. If we can give discounted rates, it helps us plan our aid stations as well. It makes it affordable. Hopefully we don't ever run out of medals and have to figure out the logistics of trying to mail them out.
Because right now, and maybe it's changed, but right now the entry fee is only $5 for the race, right?
Right now, and that's if you don't want a shirt.
Okay.
So the other thing we're doing, so we looked at our cost, and 50% if we hit 4,000 runners, 50% of our costs would be for T-shirts.
Okay.
When you're thinking about trying to give 100% of the funds back, you've got to get a lot of sponsorships to cover that. So we talked to runners, and we said, so what would you think if we separated the race entry fee from the race shirt fee? And people love the idea. They said, if it's a first-time marathoner, they're going to want to buy the shirt. If it's somebody who's run 12 races this year, they really probably aren't that concerned about the shirt, and so getting $20 off is going to be a big deal for them. So right now, it's $5, and then if you want the shirt, it's $20 more. And we're going to keep the option of not buying the shirt even as we increase the rates.
Okay. Is that unique then for most races, is unbundling the entry fee and shirts and stuff?
It is, and we weren't sure what kind of feedback we'd get because a race shirt and a race just kind of are synonymous with each other. But for us, we just kind of looked at how important is it to give 100% of the race entry fees back, and we felt it was very important to do that. At that point, you have a couple of options. You can either try to keep raising more funds, which gets pretty challenging, or you can cap your race and say we're not going to have more than 3,000 runners because that's all we can budget for and still give 100% of the fees back. So we feel like unbundling the race entry fees from the race shirts will allow us, we could be 4,000 or 5,000 runners, and we could still have way less costs than even we had last year at 3,000 runners just because of kind of unbundling the race shirts.
Is there a cap of where you guys say, hey, we're not, is there a number of entries where you go, ooh, we're not sure we can handle that anymore?
So we've kind of looked at the hotel rooms, and Salina has over 2,000 hotel rooms. And then when you think about some of the Airbnbs, those extend the number of people we could have even more. And then even last year, I mean, we had a lot of hotels that still had rooms left, but some people just like staying outside of the race community because they're used to bigger races, just being kind of chaos in terms of finding a place to eat and all of those things. And so we had some people that stayed in McPherson and Abilene. So we've got a lot of surrounding communities.
Okay.
So we feel like we'd be pretty safe up to 5, maybe even 6,000. If we start getting up to that point, we'll probably have to, run a little bit more scientific analysis of it to see exactly what the room space is. And then it gets into what percentage of your runners are out of state and or out of driving distance versus what percentage are local. Because you've got, like, Wichita was our biggest market by far last year.
Really?
And a lot of them could just buzz up the morning of, and it wouldn't be a very long drive. We had, I think, over 200 registered runners just from Wichita, which was pretty awesome.
That's cool. Yeah. I guess there's the barracks at the old the National Guard place. Just put people in the barracks. All right, you get a cot. There you go.
And the one thing we did when we picked our date, we looked at what are all of the other events and what do we not want to compete with. So Prairie Fire is Wichita's big marathon, and it's usually the second weekend in October. And so we're actually pretty strategically placed around 4 weeks after that. So if somebody has a really good half marathon and they're like, man, I've got awesome training, I should do marathon, we're an awesome choice. Likewise, if they just have a terrible race at Prairie Fire, we're kind of their redemption opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting. Okay. Do you have a favorite race that, besides the Crossroads one, but do you have a favorite race you like to go to and run?
So I really like the Eisenhower Marathon over in Abilene. There's not many really small communities that put on that high quality of a race, and they get over 30 states, which to me is pretty incredible. We're pretty fortunate in Salina in that we have an airport, so some runners actually fly directly into Salina. But for a community like Abilene, the runners have to navigate the transportation piece a little more, but they still get over 30 states every year. And the tie-in to the Eisenhower Center is pretty cool. A lot of times they have, the medals, will feature Eisenhower on them. A couple times they even had his granddaughter came and told stories about Eisenhower, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that is really unique.
And a challenge that you can try was, one thing she referenced was he could do pull-ups with both his right arm and his left arm, one-arm pull-ups. So after the podcast, we'll see if any of us can do that.
Well, I don't know if I can beat Ike in that. So, when is the Eisenhower one?
It's in April.
It's in April. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'd kind of forgotten until she was telling us a lot of the stories, but he loved athletics. He actually played football at West Point. So she just commented how proud he'd be to see, an athletic competition with his name on it, because he just really felt like, sports athletics were great.
I don't think it might have been, I read a story, it might have been Patton, not Eisenhower, that every day he ran 5 miles, and if he couldn't run anywhere, he would just jog, in place 5 miles.
We've had several presidents. I always tell people, when you look at a couple of our recent presidents have done at least, some level of running. George Bush was pretty famous. Runner's World actually did a breakdown of his running form, and he actually had a pretty good running form, which is kind of interesting.
Really?
But yeah, they said he always wanted to try to get in a run wherever he went, and so I always tell people you have to make time. You're never going to find time. When you think about people that are that busy, they're making time because they know it's going to make the rest of their day more efficient if they do. And it's the same thing with physical activity. It's just make a little bit of time, and you're going to be so much more efficient, feel better the rest of your day.
So, okay, kind of leading that then, someone who's new getting in the running, whether they want to try a 5K, half marathon, what's kind of your biggest piece of advice for a new runner kind of getting in there of just getting going?
Yeah, so I really like to have runners do like a treadmill gait analysis, and Manhattan Running Company is really great. They're a running shoe store. So basically they have you run on the treadmill. They see, every runner pronates. So when you land, you either, you roll inwards. Really how much you pronate, or if you overpronate or underpronate determines what type of a shoe. And the type of shoe, more so than, not big on any particular brand, but more so just, do you need like a motion controlled shoe, or do you need a stability shoe or a cushion shoe? That's one of the first things you need to start out with, is having the right pair of shoes. and then either working with a personal trainer or a running coach. There's some really good online programs that can walk you through, like if you're starting from scratch, you've never ran at all, there's some great entry-level programs to get you to run a 5K. I always tell people, think about doing a shorter race first because you're more likely to be successful. And if you are successful at a 5K, then you're going to be excited. You're going to want to do a 10K. And then you're going to want to do a half. And then you're going to want to do a marathon. So many times people want to do their first ever race as a marathon. And the longer the race you get, the more the little things can go wrong and really make you a rough race. So just do something small, do it really good, motivate yourself, be super excited, and then build on it from there.
So besides getting the shoes in where you have that treadmill analysis, I think, having a good pair of shoes will make or break your running experience. Someone who, like you said, wants to go find, okay, here, how do I even get a training plan or whatever it is? Are there certain sites or companies you would suggest someone go check out to get some information from?
Yeah, Runner's World is a really big one, and there's some very well-respected national coaches. Hal Hignan is one that's really popular, especially with beginning runners. Jeff Galloway, a lot of people like him just because he's really big into the walk run. So if you may find it daunting to run a mile, but maybe you could walk 50 feet and then jog 50 feet and then walk and then jog. A lot of new runners I found really like his training programs.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
What was that? I'm going to reveal my ignorance further. What did you call that? How your foot lands, what they're measuring?
Yeah, your pronation.
Pronation. Define that?
So most runners are going to either land on their heel or on their midfoot, and then your foot's going to roll in, and that's what pronation is. Now, some runners, they overpronate, meaning they need something to control that motion because there's too much pronation there.
What is that from? Habit? Is that from
body
style, body
or,
build, or
a lot of that's probably going to be genetic. Now you can somewhat predict a little bit, like how high of arches people have will tell you a little bit. Like if you have really flat feet, it's not a guaranteed, but you may be a little more likely to overpronate. Versus if you're someone who has higher arches, you may not pronate enough. You may underpronate. So, but really the best way to find out is just to do a treadmill gait analysis, and they can actually show you in slow motion what you're doing.
Is there anywhere here in Salina that does that?
I know some of your physical therapists will do that, so that's another resource. And one advantage, I think most of them are pretty reasonable. One advantage of if you're really serious about getting into running, one advantage of doing that is they can even look at, like, are you weaker on one side of your body than the other? They can look at, flexibility concerns, and they can actually develop a holistic program for you to kind of address any of your weak areas.
Interesting. Going back to the pronation and the whole shoe thing, it does seem like ever since that book Born to Run came out, there was that whole like minimalist rise of you have like the drop or the cushioning versus the non-dropping cushioning. Is that kind of, you think, again, each person and their particular, just what fits them the best in the sense of what kind of shoe you should get?
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful, especially, the longer people have ran, the harder it's going to be to make changes.
Like break some certain kind of habit?
Yeah, I know a lot of runners, and there are some benefits in maybe just throwing in some barefoot strides, things like that to strengthen your feet, but I've just known a lot of runners that did too much too quick. Injuries. And then they got injured. Yeah, so it's really, I always recommend if you can, work with a physical therapist, and they can kind of help outline a program for you to make sure that you don't make too many changes, do too much too quickly.
So what are some of the common injuries that new runners could experience then?
Stress fractures are probably the one that you worry about the most. Certainly knee injuries are going to be pretty common.
Because it seems like, too, like a new runner, they think like I have to run every day to get good at running, where it seems like most training plans have you at least resting at least 2 or 3 days during the week and kind of like focusing on like even doing like easy runs versus like tempo runs. And so like a base marathon training plan? Like, how would that look? Like, just kind of a normal week, do you think, with certain types of runs?
It's going to look a little different. I mean, for a marathon, the main run is your long run, because you've got to teach your body to deal with that fatigue. You've got to teach your body to, store utilize glycogen when you're getting tired. I think just the mental aspect of being out there for a long time. And then typically 1 or 2 quality workouts. Kind of depends. I mean, if you're a beginning runner, you may not want to train every single day. Some of your competitive marathon runners will. The one thing I tell people is, if you absolutely have to do something and you're just not willing to do a rest day, think about cross training. Just something that works a little different muscle groups so that you don't have to worry quite as much about some of those overuse injuries.
Is that kind of like swimming or biking maybe or something like that?
Yeah, swimming or biking are great options.
Okay. Do you see people do like any kind of strength training then quite a bit with running to try and get muscles built up?
Yeah, I think there's some value in strength training, especially as runners get older. In particular, you tend to lose muscle strength. And again, if you can work with a physical therapist, core strength is one area I think a lot of people neglect that's really important.
Do you listen to music when you're running a marathon? I guess you made me think about training your body to get used to being out there so long. I'm sitting there thinking, man, my mind would just be sitting there thinking about all sorts of stuff. But I didn't know, like, listen to music during a marathon, or is it, do you like to just listen to the wind? I don't know.
Yeah,
feet hit the ground.
I like to just focus on running itself. And for marathons, so we do allow music, although we caution against it just because you're not as aware of your surroundings. Mm-hmm. And so it's been back and forth for a while. USA Track and Field actually recommended, didn't allow it if you were USA Track and Field. But now it's, unless you're competing for prize money, and then you can't actually listen to music.
I was thinking earlier when you were talking about, I think it was Indian Rock, and you were comparing it to that hill in the hill in the Boston Marathon. But like when you hit, what'd you say about mile 20, 21? I can't imagine. I mean, what goes through your, what are you thinking? I mean, are you in quite a bit of pain at that point? Or is it, you're used to it because of all the training? You're talking to somebody that has no idea, no experience with that. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I always say think about the course and prepare for the spots where you're going to be hurting the most. So if you know there's a big hill at mile 20, 21, mentally prepare for that. And so like if I do a training run, I'll try to incorporate some sort of a hill in my long runs about that point. And I'll purposely hit them very hard during my long runs. And that's one thing I've started doing more, is just inserting some quality into your long run, just to teach your body how to deal with fatigue when you've ran for a long time and you're really, really tired. But I mean, any Olympic athlete you look at, whether it's Michael Phelps or any athlete, they always talk about how they visualize that perfect event. They just visualize it over and over and over. And same thing, I mean, even little things like your warm up. If you can do the same warm up when you're practicing, doing your long runs, just that mental preparation, I think, is huge.
Yeah. The book Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg talks about Michael Phelps, and his coach would always tell him, put in the tape, and he was visualizing how many times he had watched the swim in his mind. And so that was what he was telling himself, was he had the same ritual routine every time he would get in there, and he would hear that, put in the tape. But I think that's fascinating, the endurance needed, to push through. How much of it that is truly just mental? Because you've trained your body to do it. It's are you having conversations with yourself of,
yeah,
Thomas the engine, I think I can, like.
It's not too far off of that. A lot of professional runners, when they interview them, they just have a little catchphrase, and maybe it's just one word. It's like strong, and that just reminds them to relax, because so many times you tense up, your running form starts to deteriorate when you start getting tired, and sometimes just a one-word phrase just to mentally kind of get you going can be helpful. The other thing is, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of, like I mentioned, I pick certain spots in long runs and purposely run them hard, just so I teach my body what it's like to, run hard when you're really, really tired. And sometimes mentally, when you're in a race, it seems counterintuitive, but maybe just surging for just a little bit might just kind of be enough just to kind of break the monotony of running that same pace.
I have noticed too in a lot of the marathon training plans that you never do more than a 20-mile run. So you're entering a marathon, never have running that distance. Is that last 6.2 just pure adrenaline?
Yeah, and the thought process is, so when you start doing really long runs, I mean, the more tired you are, the more likely you are to get injured. So if you were trying to go out and consistently do 26-mile long runs, it would probably, the risk of injury would outweigh the benefits of running further like that. And so the thought is you're probably going to be training at a slower pace than what you're going to be racing. So hopefully if you do around a 21 miler, you're going to be out there for about the same amount of time. The other difference is tapering. So when you're doing your normal long runs, you're probably doing a pretty regular training week. And so those last couple of weeks before a marathon, you're going to taper, cut back your mileage. And so your legs should be a little more fresh. And then, again, there's a lot of research that just shows, some of your goos, your gels, I always say those things taste horrible until you're about mile 20. And then they're suddenly pretty good.
Down. So I have seen too that a lot of races offer beer after a race. I guess one, is there any benefit of that? And two, or is that something you guys are looking at doing?
So we did last year. We're probably not going to this year. I think one of the things we really want to focus on is being a family-friendly event.
Okay.
And then if you do, you kind of need to have an area so that, families, if they have young kids, because we do have separate kids fun runs, events like that. What a lot of races I think are moving more towards is they'll have a listing of locations for, maybe local, bars, places that people can go afterwards. So in terms of a recovery drink, it's going to dehydrate you is one of the challenges. So I always tell people, try to drink water, Gatorade, things like that, at least immediately when you're done. Even elite runners, when they test their hydration levels, they're typically on the verge of being dehydrated. So taking in some good, fluids with electrolytes is going to be your best option right after a race.
Cool.
And the one feedback we got was, people are mostly concerned, they just want something unique, something different. So Swans brought out their Edwards cream pie last year, and that was a huge hit because people had never seen that after a race. Cozy Inn brought in Cozy Burgers. And again, people were
local.
Local.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen again this year then, hopefully? Get the pies?
We're hoping to have both.
Can you imagine somebody that is here supporting a family member and then they get a Cozy Burger? Like the runner gets a Cozy Burger and then they're like walking up and they're like, wow, you really were sweating a lot, weren't you? Just that cozy aroma. That's so cool though, because to have Schwann's in our backyard and or Tony's and then have.
It's cool hearing that the community of Salina really embraces that, and it's a huge and it's a pro for everybody. I think it's a really cool.
And that's one of the messages we give to sponsors is we try to do as much local as we can. So we purchase the T-shirts locally. We try to purchase as many of the materials and things that we can locally. We do our race timing out of Manhattan because they're really the closest major race timing company.
Okay. Yeah, has there ever been a marathon race in Salina before besides this one?
There was one. It's been 7 or 8 years ago. They had a one. They did. It was a nice kind of local event, but it never really grew into kind of a statewide or national event. And I think part of it is just there probably needed to be a few things done differently in terms of the course. And then one of the big things that's really helped us is social media. Prior to social media, I don't know how you would reach out and reach runners all across the United States. So that's been a huge piece for us. All you have to do is do one post, throw out something a little different, something unique about the race. People see it. They're like, whoa, look at this. They share it. Pretty soon everybody's sharing it, and you can reach a lot of people.
Awesome. That's yeah.
So it's November 2nd?
Yep, November 2nd. And I forgot to mention, so year one, we did a post-race survey and got great reviews. The number one thing that people wanted was a kids race. And so last year we actually had a half-mile kids fun run. And so we gave them the same exact finisher medals that we gave the marathon runners. And it was just, yeah, just really cool to watch the kids and how excited they were, especially when they got this huge medal.
That's cool too. Again, because you're introducing and you're creating, like you said, keeping it family friendly. What a better way for a family to stay healthy together, even like train together if you want to, and compete together. Not a lot of sporting events allow that, and that's really cool.
And we had people. I mean, the cool thing was there were parents that would come up and just with tons of questions. It was really awesome because they had no background in the sport of running, and it's like, wow, their kids getting involved with this, and they're learning something that they've never been involved with.
Yeah, that's really
and they're
cool.
They're seeing people. Well, like I said, there's people in their 80s, walking, jogging, the 5K, and suddenly it's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, I could do this, and my kid and I could both have something that we enjoy doing together.
That's really cool. Yeah, growing community and growing stronger, healthier people is always a good thing. But you have anything else, Josh?
No, I'm truly inspired. Daniel, thanks for coming. And
can we get a commit to do the half marathon from you?
Well, at least the 5K.
There you go. Perfect.
Can you walk, run a 5K?
Yeah. We actually have a 5K walk. And what we learned, so we used to always say 5K walk, run, but we learned we market them separately.
Oh, that's right.
Because people that walkers would be like, well, is that really a race for me? And we're like, yes, we want it to be a complete family-friendly event because we've got the course open for 6 hours. And even the half marathon, if people wanted to walk it, they could, as long as they were within that 6 hour overall time limit.
Do you allow pets at all?
We don't.
Okay.
We've gotten a lot of questions on that.
That'd be hard, I think, if you had dogs and hard to pick up and on the trail or in the path and everything.
Yeah, and just with the size of our event. I mean, if we were a smaller event, maybe we could consider, and I know there are some races that do dogs. There's just a lot of extra things you'd have to, from a liability standpoint. And that was the other piece around, not having alcohol too is the liability component. And then it's just extensive event permitting processes to do that. And so one of the things we talked about was like, so what can we do with that time and that energy that we put into that piece of it? There's a lot of cool things we can expand and grow the race in.
So if people want to sign up for it or find you guys, you have social media. What social media channels are you guys on?
So we primarily just focus on Facebook.
Okay.
And then we have a website, runsalinacrossroads.com. That's a great way to learn about the race. And then one of the things we started new last year was we create a runner's guide. So every runner that registers, we send them out a complete runner's guide, and it's pretty much a Salina Crossroads 101. Everything from a parking map to the times for packet pickup and location to, what are the race routes to what are the policies for the race? Like, can you wear music? You listen to music? Can you have pets? Pretty much any detail that we think someone needs to know for the day of the race we put in there. What's the cancellation policy?
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, man, and really giving the background for the marathon. And hopefully you guys can continue to grow and hope get that 5, 6, 7,000.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have to say a huge thank you to City of Salina, all of our sponsors, and just the whole community. One message that we try to put out is we know we're kind of a pain for that one day because we disrupt traffic, but if you put up with us, we'll bring a huge economic impact, and we'll donate a lot of money to youth sports.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah,
wow.
It's cool to know that that's happening in the backyard, but how do you know if you never hear it, right?
Yeah.
So appreciate you coming on and sharing your passion and setting this thing up.
Yeah, man.
So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Incredibly Ordinary. If you want to hear more stories like the one you heard today, be sure to click the follow button so you can be notified when new episodes become available. For more information about today's episode, or if you have an amazing story to share or want to feature your business on Incredibly Ordinary podcast, then we want to hear from you. Find our contact details in today's show notes and get in touch. Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analysis of Billings Group. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, Private Client Services, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Billings Group, or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Securities offered by registered representatives of Private Client Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. Private Client Services, Billings Group, and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.